It's been a long time.
Kimmie Weeks is tracing his way back to his childhood. He's on his way to an old school campus called Fendel. When he was here, it was 1991 and the thick of the Liberian Civil War. There has been a long history of tension between indigenous Liberians and the former slaves from the United States of America who settled here. This fled into a fully fledged civil war.
Well, our home had been taken over by the rebels. There was just a lot of shelling. They took over, and basically they went from house to house, moving people essentially out of their homes.
Kimmie, aged 9, and his mother joined hundreds of refugees to walk down this road. They took 12 hours of hopeful steps from their home in Monrovia to Fendel. Today, it takes Kimmie just half an hour to drive there from the same spot. 23 years on, the school is an empty shell.
All of these buildings were classrooms that basically people were staying in. And some of them had 20 families, 30 families, basically everybody was squeezed together. And we were in one of them with about 16 to 18 other extended families, essentially. So this was home for about 6 months. The corner in the distance next to the door was where my mother and I were laying down. Yeah, the more I see it, the more I know that's the exact spot in that room.
The refugees were dying every day from sickness and starvation. Disease was rife, as there was only a nearby lake to bathe in, and so many bodies were packed in a small space. Those who survived illness were at risk of being raped or killed by soldiers.
There would just be the wails of death and people who were dying, mothers who were losing their children. It was just intense, very, very intense. And now it's an empty building, but even the grounds around us, lots of people are buried here who just simply didn't make it. So.
None of the refugees were strong enough to dig graves, so they tossed dead bodies onto the fields surrounding the classrooms. What Kimmie didn't know when he arrived was that he would walk away with his biggest lesson. While in the camp, Kimmie became deathly ill. Dehydrated due to cholera, he also contracted chickenpox and jaundice. He saw no doctor or nurse and was administered no medicine except for a few herbs. He fell unconscious.
There was a point that I hadn't gotten up for a long time. And again, we're already surrounded by dead bodies. In this room where everybody's close together, everybody's concerned. Nobody wants to have a dead body decaying right in the room.
They tossed Kimmie's lifeless body onto a field of corpses. But his mother refused to believe he was gone. She looked amongst the piles of bodies until she finally caught sight of Kimmie.
When she phoned me, I think the excitement and everything, she just started shaking. And when I opened my eye, there's just, because I can just feel this shaking, really being shaken up. Then she lifts me up and she brings me back in to the room. So I mean, she comes from across with me in her arms, and people are completely stunned.
Kimmie was confused when he regained consciousness. His mother explained to him that he'd been left for dead.
If my mom hadn't come out at that point, basically my burial ground would have been right here.
He made a pledge.
I would spend the rest of my life making sure that I change people's lives.
On the way to Fendel, he had seen something that remained etched in his mind like a deep scar.
This was when I first saw a child soldier, the very first checkpoint we got to. And it's a kid my age who's holding a gun, essentially. And that stuck with me, just knowing there was someone this young holding a real gun.
The use of children in armed conflicts dates back to before World War I. Boys between the ages of 9 and 18 have been used as soldiers because they are easy to condition and brainwash. One of the 20,000 child soldiers who fought in the Liberian Civil War was Maurice Matadi. Both his parents had been killed because his father, an ex-military man, had refused to join the army. He was 11 when soldiers found him hiding in a derelict building. They abducted him and forced him to kill. Children were given drugs to numb their sense of right and wrong and as a way to control them. Once hooked, they would do anything their commanders wanted.
Child soldier was the best bodyguard because even the older one that behind the commander were afraid of us. Because if the commander said we should beat you, we'll beat you. If the commander said we should torture you, we'll torture you.
They would have no choice. There would be no option to say no, or say I'm too young, or no, I don't know how to fight, or I don't want to be a soldier. It was just a matter of you're taken, essentially. And I think that changes your entire life.
The only thing that I could depend on was my AK, because that's the only thing I felt that it could save me, it could help me, it could find food for me, it could find anything that I wanted. So I took the AK-47 as my parents and my family.
6 months later, and Kimmie was out of Fendel. United Nations peacekeepers came to Liberia to quell the conflict and manage to stabilize the country's capital, Monrovia. Kimmie's mother was still recovering from the events at Fendel. And Stephen Toe, who ran an orphanage, took in the boy.
For the first time I saw him when I took him, I just fell in love with the kid. There, the way he spoke to me, he was very smart, eloquent.
While at the orphanage, Kimmie was bitterly aware that although the capital where he stayed was at peace, warlords still ruled 99% of Liberia with an iron fist and thousands of children. He couldn't shake the image of boys his age holding guns. At the time, the UN was giving out copies of the CRC, the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Kimmie was 11 years old and inspired. With a group of friends, he started a child rights advocacy group called The Voice of the Future. Its aim was to speak out on behalf of children. He sent 17 proposals to UNICEF asking for funding and support for the group's activities. All 17 were rejected. Then came the 18th proposal. This one was specifically about disarmament.
The whole idea was that we would go to the rural areas and talk to the rebel leaders, and kids would lead the fight for the disarmament of all child soldiers.
Kimmie's childhood friend and neighbor, Isaac Hine was one of the boys who went to meet the rebels.
Kimmie went into the barracks, and there was a guy with us, one of our friends. He was a child. He was actually in the army. So it was astonishing.
When we reached to them, we would talk to the rebel leaders. Each of us would talk about the experiences we had and the devastating effects of the war.
It was the first time children had talked to warlords about the real pains of the conflict.
This is the culture in Liberia where children do not speak. But then you have children who are now willing to risk everything to meet rebel leaders, but then also come up with such powerful statements.
The group of kids got the warlords to sign a petition agreeing to free their child fighters. But 15-year-old Kimmie needed the authorities to enforce it. He was finally allowed to present the petition to the Speaker of Liberia's House of Representatives. He crafted an official document he had modeled on some of the UN charters and resolutions he had read.
This was the grind. This was, walking into a place and people look at your shoes and they look you up and down and they're like, what the heck is he doing here? And then you stand up to talk and then the room just starts to get quiet and the old people start to turn around and they're like, wow, the children the children are moving and shaking. I mean, those were moments that are priceless.
Whereas on November 20th, 1989, the General Assembly of the United Nations, meeting in New York, adopted a Convention on the Rights of the Child. The Voice of the Future Incorporated is pleased to submit to this honorable body, the Transitional Legislative Assembly of the Republic of Liberia, the following proposals for the pursuit of considerations. That the Assembly takes the necessary measures to ensure that the Convention on the Rights of the Child, as adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations and ratified by the Liberian government, becomes a practical reality.
UNICEF wanted all child soldiers disarmed by December 1996. However, it was the Children's Disarmament Campaign that helped to make this a reality.
It raised an elan that brought a change in the country.
That December, 20,000 child soldiers in Liberia laid down their guns. But just a year later, things took a different turn. Former rebel leader Charles Taylor was voted in as president in the first election since the war. Meanwhile, Kimmie had become a child broadcaster at a national radio studio while still attending high school. He got a tip-off that child soldiers were being trained behind high metal fences at Charles Taylor's Shufflin military base. He went to investigate, and sure enough, there were children there.
So I busted out my tape recorder, went to Shufflin, and sure enough, there were the children. And started doing interviews with them, talking to each person, getting their age, where they were from, what they were doing there.
His findings were ignored by government ministers and UNICEF. So his next port of call, the media. Huge headlines followed on the front of Liberia's national newspapers. 500 children in military training, says Kimmie Weeks. International journalists went to the military base and the story escalated. Charles Taylor called an emergency cabinet meeting on how to tackle the embarrassment. He was angry.
Mr. Taylor was a man he don't take mess from nobody.
Charles Taylor had a reputation for cold-hearted brutality. In 2012, he was found guilty by the International Criminal Court of murder, rape, sexual slavery, enforced amputations, and recruiting child soldiers.
They defense minister, the labor minister first called me a rabble-rouser, a dangerous subversive. The justice minister and the defense minister said I was a threat to the Constitution of Liberia. I'm 17. I'm a threat to the Constitution.
The hunt was on. Charles Taylor sent his men to find Kimmie. They went to everyone he knew, including a close family friend and neighbor who had helped to bring him up.
They wanted to catch him and kill him. That was a tough time in our life, in the history of Kimmie life. We worried as a family. All the little kids, I had a baby at the time. He was just 3 years old. I told him, I said, if anyone come here and ask you if you know Kimmie, tell them you don't know him.
They started asking everybody, he's a little skinny little boy, big eyes, loud mouth, he liked to talk a lot, this, that. Everybody said, no, 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 no.
So when he came that day, I told him that he should run. He should run anywhere his folks would take him. That was when Kimmie left.
UNICEF officials helped Kimmie to get out safely. He sneaked out of the country by bundling into a car with a cultural dance troupe, dressed as one of the performers.
If the securities had stopped the car at some point and said perform, I would have been screwed because I didn't know any of the dance routines at all. But we drove city to city until we finally reached the Ivory Coast.
From the Ivory Coast, he went to the United States of America seeking political asylum.
Nobody knew I had left Liberia. So for weeks, everybody actually thought I had died.
Leaving Liberia was a twist of fate for Kimmie. He went to a free government school in America where he started telling friends about life in Africa.
Everybody in this school had a perception of Africa that was so skewed, was not funny. And so that set up a new path of re-educating.
Kimmie started Youth Action International in 2005 as a small college-based organization to raise funds for people back home. In the meantime, Kimmie got a BA in Political Science and History from Amherst College and a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania.
I got a full scholarship to Amherst College for all 4 years, and then did my master's and got a scholarship as well. So basically, my entire education in America, which was at the best universities and schools, was all free.
But he topped the bill with an honorary doctorate from Amherst.
Kimmie L. Weeks, class of 2005. Please come forward. Kimmie, brought back from the dead, literally, you have given life and hope to your countrymen, to the mother continent of Africa, and to all of us.
With initials before and after his name and thousands of dollars of funds in his pocket, Dr. Kimmie Weeks returned to war-torn Liberia in 2006. He recruited a small team to Youth Action International.
So that our younger people can be...
They started to hold workshops across the country, offering vocational training and counseling.
Because if this man learned this computer...
His programs helped to deal with the rampant crime that was a hangover of the Liberian Civil War. 90% of the criminals on Liberia's streets were young people ranging between the ages of 19 and 36. Many were ex-child soldiers brought up in a culture of drugs and violence. They were commonly rounded up during night raids.
All of our programs, we titled them War-Affected Youth. And that would encompass both former child soldiers and non-combatants. Every young person who's seen war has scars of war.
They got skills in construction, carpentry, computers or cosmetics, and then received a microloan to set up a business. Social entrepreneur Sprite Laureano has invested in Youth Action International since 2008.
It, allows young people to actually have some value in their society, to recognize that they have a gift and a skill that they can bring, even if they don't have a great, regular education. They can, work with their hands.
Each program included counseling to help heal the trauma from the war.
Well, giving people access through his initiative by influencing people to come in with trauma counseling and talking to these guys, getting them off the street, engaging them constructively from a different angle instead of the law enforcement point of view where we come in, arrest, prosecute, and detain, and send for rehabilitation. His approach has been different, and it has helped to a very larger extent.
Kimmie expanded the organization to other war-affected African nations. He ran the same programs there and also partnered with various youth groups to boost their work. By 2009, Youth Action International had helped around 150,000 people in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi. For his work, Kimmie was given the 2007 Golden Brick Award, which recognizes young change makers.
It's really good to be here. It's an honor to receive this award. I share it with the millions of children in Africa around the world suffering in extreme circumstances. We will rise again. Thank you.
The same year, Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf presented Kimmie with Liberia's highest honor by decorating him Knight Grand Commander in the Humane Order of African Redemption. Kimmie is the youngest recipient of this award.
Oh, we gonna try till we reach the sky, 'cause I got a story to tell that might inspire someone who living in hell.
Kimmie has put his backing behind up-and-coming Liberian artists.
Yeah. Ooh, it's my life, it's I'm a doctor, oh Lord, you whatever I choose, that's my life, oh beggar.
I started to hear more young musicians, and just hearing their music, hearing the amount of spirit and heart they put on it, and seeing the impact of their lyrics. In a single song, they can basically change the mindset of an entire population.
Now who said, tell me now who said, now you will never be nobody, you will always be a beggar, tell me.
Kimmie signed 5 aspiring superstars, including Lady Murphy, to his new record label, KLW Entertainment.
There are so many young artists who have so much talents in Liberia, but they still don't have the support that they need. And when we realized that, we said, let's create an opportunity for these young people.
You will never be nobody, say it out loud.
To see a guy in that kind of a position, always waiting to talk to people, always smiling, always waiting to give help. Always waiting to give help out to people, ready to stretch his hand out to people. You don't easily find people like that, right?
I can get inspired by him, learn from him, and be wherever I want to be today.
Who you are today or where you are today cannot determine who you can be tomorrow. So no matter what the circumstances, anybody can rise forward. No problem. That's the easiest way to reach me.
He gives motivational talks around the country. Here, young people from slum area Crewtown have gathered to listen to what he has to say.
If any of you want to succeed, if any of you want to go beyond the person who's next to you, you have to put in more time. more effort. Always, in whatever you do, work hard. Put in the extra time, and you will get the results. Who can guess my age? Anybody? Any volunteer?
36.
Close. 32 years old. I am 32. That's my age. When I asked my age, you even had a guess as high as 40. Because really my bio and my age really does not sync, especially in Liberia. So for young people to get that sense that, wow, it's a 32-year-old guy who's had some of the same extreme experiences we had, that makes it real. It makes success or the chance of success or the idea of success very real.
So Kimmie Weeks really served as a motivating factor to me. Taking into consideration, if you look at my age, I'm 30 years old, and Kimmie Weeks, who is a data degree holder, is 32 years old. So it's a complete challenge to every youth.
The most important thing that remains in my mind is to know your vision and know who you want to become.
Back in that refugee camp at Fendel, when Kimmie realized he had a destiny, he turned his own life around. Then he believed thousands more could do the same.
His driving force, you know, that drive, that energy that is in him, you know, that determination. I don't know where it comes from. He doesn't get tired. Kimmie works so hard, he doesn't get tired. And sometimes I like, it's just him. Some people are just superhumans, you know. He believes he can change the world. That's just it.
You know, he has no fear. I asked him at one time, I said, he was telling me stories about when he was young and started the child disarmament campaign and walking into the military camps with the generals and missiles flying around and people trying to kill him and all that. And, you know, and I said, you know, how did you survive that? And he said, I just always knew I had a destiny.
No matter how amazing something I do in the future, even if it's world peace, will not be as incredible as those moments, because it was really fighting the odds, the unexpected, the stuff that nobody would imagine, and making it happen. Yeah, beautiful moments.
It's my life, if I'm a doctor, or lawyer, whatever I choose. That's my life, oh beggar, politician, musician. It's my life, I'll be doing the talking while I do the walking. That's my life, I don't care what they say, I'll be bravely bluffing.